We have some big news out of Salesforce. This is like such an interesting story. They recently did their big conference. They unveiled a whole bunch of new stuff. Really interesting. Salesforce is going pretty hard on agents, which of course is kind of the future, and it's the next step in AI models that we know when it comes to OpenAI, and they kind of have their 5 levels to AGI. Their first was pretty much ChatGPT, so it was kind of like an agent, or it was a model that can give you feedback. The second was reasoning, which is what people are saying they've achieved with O1.
Mm-hmm.
And the third step that now OpenAI is going to be focusing on is agents. So this is kind of, this isn't just like, oh, some random trend. Like we see like very well in companies' documentation, this is the big thing that everyone is focusing on and pushing towards. And Salesforce is one of these companies. HubSpot also is doing some stuff here too. But in any case, it is very interesting because when you think about it, like what happens when Salesforce unleashes all of these AI agents, maybe these AI sales agents, that could be using voice technology to make calls. I was recently consulting with a company, and they're looking to completely, essentially, have all of their salespeople replaced by AI voice, which is mind blowing to me. And they're looking at the tools and the ways that they do this. So their whole sales department is going to have this huge new thing. In any case, it sounds great, but then all of a sudden you think like, wait a second, doesn't Salesforce make its money by selling seats and licenses to companies for their sales forces? So what happens when, those people get replaced by these AI agents, theoretically, right? That Salesforce is doing. So they're having to completely rethink the way that they charge for their software in light of this, which makes you think, yes, they know exactly what's going on and that this is actually going to happen. So fascinating. But I mean, before I ramble on about my speculations on the AI space, Connor, what are your thoughts and what are you seeing on the whole Salesforce story?
I mean, Dreamforce is always one of the huge events of the year, and people follow Salesforce because they're such a leader, or one of the leaders, along with our friend Brian Solis' ServiceNow and some other great organizations out there, AWS. We have some big giants in the area, and this is where, again, on AI Applied, how does this apply to you, right? Because we talked about, Jaeden, on a previous episode about Slack, which is owned by Salesforce, and how Slack is going to have agents. And I think there's some question about, are those even agents? Sometimes they'll just call things agents. They aren't really agents. So anytime you sort of see, this company now has agents, guys, they don't. Agents are not here yet. They're maybe on tiny little things they are, but there's a huge problem with agents, which just means that these, AI sort of, let's call them large language models or something else, are working autonomously. You say, hey, go figure out how to do this. And the agent will go off and book your flight to Denver and book your hotel and all that kind of stuff. Or you'll say, hey, build out a marketing plan. It'll go do that. The huge problem with this, obviously, and this is the hardest problem to solve, is keeping a human in the loop. Like, how do you know that it's making the right kind of reservations for you? How do you know that it's creating the right kind of, business plan for you? You have to stay in the loop. These things are not smart enough yet. However, we also know that agents are coming. I mean, heck, when Sam Altman did Dev Day for OpenAI last year, and they announced those custom GPTs, which if you haven't used, please go and use their little personalized GPTs. You set it up with what they call a RAG model. You put in your own document, and essentially you can talk to that document like a talking book out of Beauty and the Beast or something like that. But even there, Sam Altman was saying, we're going to talk about agents, but this is the beginning of it, right? So agents are still in its embryonic stages. But to your point, the really interesting part about this is not, well, what are the agents doing in Salesforce? The interesting part is what you're bringing up, I think, as well. And I think you and I are on the same page, which is, what does this do to jobs, right? I get this question all the time. I know you probably do too, Jaeden. Like, how does AI impact jobs? Is it going to take jobs? So I think, my big thought on this, and you and I have talked about this before, is that AI doesn't really take jobs, it takes tasks. And so a job is not a monolithic thing, it's a series of tasks. Now, if your job only has a couple of tasks, and one of those tasks is summarizing documents, okay, then, they're probably going to need less of that job in any particular company. But now Salesforce is really coming out and really acknowledging that these are going to take jobs. Not tomorrow, guys, not in the next year or anything like that, maybe, but 2 years down the road, I think that's where we are going to be, because it's going to be able to automate things that humans can do. So the interesting part about what Salesforce is doing is that they're actually changing how they charge, because as Jaeden was talking about, it's like, wait a minute, if we have less customers, that's less seats, less licenses. How are we going to do this? So So essentially, they unveiled what they called Agent Force, which is this suite of autonomous agents designed to handle uh, sales and marketing and everything that Salesforce does well. But Mark Benioff, who's the CEO, obviously over there, talked about this as this really hard pivot. And when you hear Salesforce, who's already making a gazillion dollars doing a hard pivot, you're like, why? And they have to they have to pivot the whole company to agents. Guys, this should have red flags all over it, not because it's wrong, but it's just the future. So the thing that that really caught my eye, Jaeden, was that they're planning to charge $2 per conversation, which is a totally different model when conversations are handled by these AI agents. And that is a huge departure from just the subscription-based model. So I throw this right back to you and be like, what do you think about this? How is this going to work? Like, this is not just changing jobs in the job landscape, but this is changing the companies that hire, and that employ hundreds of thousands of people. What does this do to our entire economy?
Yeah, no, I think this is so fascinating and also so exciting and also so terrifying. So it's all of them.
Yes,
And but
all
the
of them.
but the reason that I think this is interesting and such a big story is because, right, so they're going to charge $2 a conversation. My first reaction when I saw that, and I bet a lot of people might even be on the same page, I was like, $2, like, oh my gosh, like
Right.
that's so
Crazy expensive.
expensive. Like, if I have an organization, I want to scale it up to 10,000 conversations a day, then that's going to be like so much money. But it's like, yeah, well, if you're scaling up to 10,000 conversations a day, that's a lot of money. And also, what would it cost you to currently have your current sales force doing those conversations, right? Like,
Right.
they're all paid an annual salary, their daily rate, they get around
Right.
to like talking to 20 people, maybe. Like, it's obviously way cheaper. So then what is it really doing? It's essentially Salesforce, the software company, is becoming the literal Salesforce for companies. And no longer is it a software that supports your Salesforce, it is your Salesforce. To me, that is
Right.
so
Interesting.
crazy. And I think the way that you frame this is so important as a company, like as Salesforce is framing it. I mean, the honest framing that Connor and I try to give you all is, look, sales people are their jobs are going to change quite a lot, and you have to be creative and you have to work hard and use a lot of AI tools to stay ahead and to stay relevant. A lot of people are going to see probably layoffs in this industry, I think, which from maybe bigger companies, but that might still trickle down to smaller companies that might not be using a lot of
Mhm.
these tools. I don't know. It's going to be interesting. I'm trying to be like honest and not too
Yeah.
pessimistic, right? It's going to change a lot.
Yeah.
Obviously,
It,
Salesforce
it,
is showing this. What I do think is interesting though is like the optics that Salesforce tries to portray, um,
yeah.
where just like they're not saying like we're going to completely replace everyone's Salesforce and we will be everyone's Salesforce will be the software that is at all the salespeople in the world, because that doesn't sound good to a lot of people. That they might like have quite a negative I don't know, reaction to that. The way that
Mhm.
Salesforce is framing it is that it's going to let you increase your workforce to capacity during really busy periods, right? So it's the Christmas season. We have to hire all these gig workers because we're making way more sales and we need people to help with like customer service during like the busy season. We could just, outsource it all over to the software that's going to run it all, and then turn it off when we're done. Okay.
Mhm.
Yes, that's a great way to frame it. But in reality, if you could actually do that and the software actually does replace you having to hire gig workers or scaling up your organization during a busy period, why would it not be able to just replace everyone that's currently there during the normal period, right? So that's kind of like the elephant in the room, in my opinion, on this whole conversation.
Yeah.
And I'm just bringing it up because I like, to be honest, I think this is something that people need to think about, need to prepare for, need to think of how they're setting themselves apart, what they're doing, or if you're an organization, the role of the salespeople in your organization, what that looks like. There's a lot of questions and a lot of conversations. I mean, I'm not going to dive into everything, but I'm just trying to, like Connor was saying, like there are some red flags here. You need to
Yeah.
be paying attention to these right now.
You need to be paying attention. You need to get fluent in generative AI for sure. That's critical. But also, if you have any role in an organization that's doing any kind of long-term strategic planning, I have seen very few organizations that I've worked with anyway do this well long term. And when I say long term, I don't mean long term. I mean like 2 to 3 years, which now feels very, very long term in the AI space, right? Like it's not like 10-year plans. Forget them, right? I mean that's the robot overlords are going to be running your company. I mean the path to AGI, as they say, step 5 or level 5 of AGI, they say is that agents are just running entire corporations. But even in the short term, 2-year term, I really encourage you, bring this stuff up to your boss. This is what we do here on this podcast. We think about how this applies to you tomorrow. think about how agents are going to impact your 2 to 3 year time horizon. Because when places are saying, well, what will AI do? One of the things that will almost certainly be able to do in the next, let's call it 3 years to be super conservative, is having agents really replacing some human workforce, sort of like at least partially replacing the human workforce. And that has to be one of the models for your long term strategic planning. So look at what people like Mark Benioff are saying. Salesforce, again, I don't know how much they do in revenue, but it's colossal. They're integrated. Them and ServiceNow probably cover 90% of the globe in terms of these as service providers. I mean, they talk about generative AI, eating SaaS and things like that, software as a service. But really, the big thing that you should be thinking about for your company is what happens if this starts to happen, and what are the low level tasks that you may not even need to hire for anymore? And most importantly, getting everybody leveled up on generative AI so you understand the implications and what the capabilities are right now.
100%. Just a side note, Salesforce does over $9 billion, I think $9.2 billion in revenue. So they're doing a lot. And if this is their pivot and where they're thinking the market is going, I would say we should probably listen to where they're at on this, because they probably have the best intel on the industry of anyone. So really interesting stuff. Thank you so much for tuning into the podcast today. If you learned something, if you felt like, this was really useful. If you left the podcast feeling like, oh man, I've really got to work on some of my generative AI stuff, I think the number one thing that you can probably do, if you haven't already, is taking Conor's generative AI course. There's a link in the show notes for that. This is something that is going to 100% help you level up, not just how you use AI tools, but how you think about AI tools, the frameworks that you can use. And so this is going to be something that I think is timeless. It's evergreen education. Really, really great stuff. Obviously, this is coming from the man, the myth, and the legend, Conor himself. So if you haven't already, check that out. Highly recommend it. And I hope that you all have an amazing rest of your day.